Hello, my name is Ron Schlittler, and I'm the Assistant Director for the American Psychological Association's Sexual Orientation and Gender Diversity portfolio. Welcome to the webinar. Tina?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Christina Patterson. I'm a clinical psychologist licensed in the states of Nevada and New Mexico. Excited to have you here today. I am the co-chair of the Public Policy Committee for Division 44 and excited to chat with you all today. Okay. We are really excited to have you. Today, Ron and I are going to be co-hosting a webinar titled Psychology and LGBTQ+ State Legislative Advocacy 2021. And we are thrilled with the level of interest in today's topic. We have more than 1,800 registrants, and we are very pleased to have you here. The session is being recorded and will be shared with everyone in 1 to 2 weeks after today. The slides will be made available to you immediately. I believe they're off to the side and also through registration with the webinar. There will also soon be a link with the web pages that we will introduce today later on through Ron. This webinar is a culmination of months-long collaborative effort among APA Advocacy, the APA Office on Sexual Orientation and Gender Diversity, and the Division 44 Public Policy Committee to increase engagement in state advocacy and enhance collaboration with state psychology associations. Next slide, please.
So our first order of business is to introduce to you our colleagues who have been part of this project. Today, you'll also be hearing from Andrew Strickland, who's the Legislative and Regulatory Officer at the APA Advocacy Office. And he will be telling you a bit about our new resources that are online before we actually delve into those web pages and take a look.
I've already introduced myself. Let me introduce my co-chair of the Public Policy Committee, Dr. Michelle Schleihofer. She is handling the backside of the operations today, answering questions and filtering through, responding in the chat, and we're excited to have her join us as well.
Great. And we'd also like to acknowledge our colleague Leo Rennie, who is the Senior Director for Congressional Affairs and Federal Relations. He is with Andrew in the Advocacy Office. And though Leo is not presenting today, we wanted to note his supporting role in this collaboration and also to let you know that you'll likely hear from Leo in future programming like this as it pertains to federal issues. Next slide. And so this is our agenda for today, just to let you see what we're planning to cover. We're working our way through the welcome right now. We're going to introduce this initiative of connecting psychology to LGBT plus legislative advocacy. Tina's going to give you some time with why get involved with advocacy, and then Andrew's going to discuss navigating the resources, and then we're actually going to go to the new web page resources and walk you through what you'll find there so that we can introduce them and you can see how they might be helpful in your work. And then next, Christina will discuss some next steps, and we'll open it up after that for some discussion and questions and answers, and then a final few minutes to wrap up. Also, please know that at the end of the session, you'll have an opportunity to fill out a questionnaire to find out how this went for you, what you thought of it, and if you got what you came for. And so we'll look forward to hearing what you have to tell us about that.
Next slide, please. So let me introduce this initiative. This has been a year-long process, a year-long this month, of course. So last February, myself, Michelle, Ron, and Leo started meeting to get together to talk about being proactive regarding all of this anti-LGBTQ plus legislation that we saw that was really permeating pre-COVID. And what we wanted to do was create some form of resources around target issues that we were seeing consistently across, such as bathroom inclusion, all the way to access to healthcare and access to transition services based on gender identity and a wide variety of different needs. So we began meeting monthly and then every other week and then weekly to be able to put together ideas. So we have targeted strategies that we are introducing to you today. And ultimately what we decided to do was create a self-serve one-stop shop online support system for psychologists who are engaging in advocacy and for those that need psychological science to back their advocacy that they're already doing. And what we're going to do is share with you today the beginning portions of that and share our next steps of what we're wanting to do. So today's webinar is to really launch this initiative that has been a year-long progress that we're excited to share. Next slide, please. So the question I often get is, why get involved in advocacy? What is advocacy? And so let me introduce that first, because I often hear this from psychologists regarding our professional identity quite a bit. So there are different types of advocacy areas. There's public policy, which is legislative advocacy. There's social justice. These are about human rights that may or may not also include particular legislation. And professional advocacy, which is really the combination of public policy and social justice advocacy as it pertains to a professional identity. In particular today, we're going to really hit that third one, because what I want to do is hopefully make a case about why it is appropriate, necessary, and ethical for psychologists to engage in advocacy, and also to review these resources to get you started if you're not already, or to enhance the work you're already doing if you are. Next slide, please. So why get involved? First and foremost, I want to address our APA Code of Ethics. There are numerous aspects within the code, but I'm highlighting two principles in particular, Principle D and Principle E. Principle D is about justice. And a direct quote from that is that psychologists recognize that fairness and justice entitle all persons to access to and benefit from the contributions of psychology. Meaning, psychologists recognize that all persons are deserving of the benefits of the work that we do, whether that's clinical, research, advocacy, teaching, scholarship, and learning, the wide variety that all people are entitled to benefit from that work that we do. And to bring that in connection to Principle E, which is respect for people's rights and dignity, psychologists try to eliminate the effect on their work of biases based in these factors, and they do not knowingly participate in or condone activities of others based upon such prejudices. So basically what we need to do is be aware of biases and prejudices within ourselves, within our field, and of course within the broader world, and that we actively work to go against those biases and prejudices to create that fairness and justice that all people are entitled to, outlined in Principle D. And so these go hand in hand, and the way that we do that with advocacy is that we are engaging on systems level shifts to make it to where all people can access just and fair benefits of psychology, whether that's access to our clinical services, access to health and well-being, and equal rights, which impact health and well-being. So this is not just, I think psychologists should do this because I find it really cool and exciting, but this is an ethical principle. And obviously I'm not alone. For instance, Nadal's article in 2017 also argues that advocacy is a professional obligation, and it is central to the role of psychologists, and it is in line with our ethical guidelines. Next slide, please. Further, if we look at APA's multicultural guidelines, there are a couple of aspects within the guidelines that also enhance this. So in Guideline 5, psychologists aspire to recognize and understand historical and contemporary experiences with power, privilege, and oppression. And as such, they seek to address institutional barriers and related inequities, disproportionalities, and disparities of law enforcement, administration, criminal justice, educational, mental health, and other systems as they seek to promote justice, human rights, and access to quality and equitable mental and behavioral health services. Meaning, we see it, we recognize the systems that continue to perpetuate oppression, and we work to do something about that so that all folks, no matter what the system is, can access quality care. Next slide, please. Further, the guidelines also talk about in Principle 5 that psychologists are encouraged to advocate for accessibility and pursue treatment with social responsibility, adhering to all elements of social justice with a wide variety of identities as outlined here, including LGBTQ+ identities and intersecting with race, ethnicity, linguistics, incarceration status, immigration status, socioeconomic factors, etc. and that psychologists endeavor to promote advocacy beyond the direct support of clients to include public policy decisions, advances in human welfare services, public health, systems of care, training, education, etc. So what this basically is it is further detailing the fact that psychologists not only need to, because it's in line with their ethical guideline, but in order to actually create access to appropriate care so that all folks can benefit from psychology, we must engage in some form of advocacy to work through these systems of oppression, dismantle them, and create a just and fair society for all folks to benefit from. Next slide, please. So say that you're on board with that. You're like, I agree with you, Christina, 100%. But maybe. So why are there barriers to involvement? For instance, some folks are just not interested, they're uncertain, or they're unaware. So some folks might not be interested. I can't change interest. You are on this webinar, so I assume you are already interested. But my argument tends to be whether or not you are interested, it impacts you. If you don't want to get involved, people will be making decisions for you that impact you, impact the work you do, impact your day-to-day lives. So you don't have to be interested, but other people are, and they will create change, whether or not you like that change. They're uncertain, they don't know how to, they don't know what to, they feel they don't have the skills to, which is what we're hoping to kind of address with this initiative and rolling out. So I'll hold that one for just a moment until we introduce our web pages a little bit later. And lack of awareness. They just don't know that it's a professional responsibility to get involved with it. They don't know how to. They don't know what the issues are. So taking a step and joining a webinar like today is to increase awareness. What are the issues? What are resources out there? What are we doing about it? How do I get involved? All of those pieces. It also may be seen outside the scope of practice. This is not unique to psychology. This is pretty consistent across mental health fields. This is not outside of our scope. This is firmly rooted in our ethics and our multicultural guidelines. I would also argue too, for those folks who are more clinically oriented, I hear this a ton in my clinical siblings, which is, I'm not going to bring that into the clinical room. I'm not going to. And you don't have to. You don't have to bring it into the clinical room. You can advocate outside of it. This is my lunch break that I'm sitting here doing this with you so that I can do this in my personal time. I would also say that there is an argument to be made that it absolutely belongs inside the scope of a clinical room. I recently saw an amazing webinar on dismantling white supremacy through the trust, and they often talked about, is it healthy for folks who come into clinical services to engage in racism, to engage in discrimination? Is that healthy for them? If the answer is no, we would address that. Same kind of concept here. Is it oppositional to positions of scientific neutrality? We could argue, and I think debate philosophically about whether or not there's true neutrality in all of these beautiful pieces, but I would argue that the scope of which we are doing our work is to better understand people. And we better understand people so that we can create a fair and just existence for them so that folks can have access to a healthy well-being, as healthy as they can. And so engaging in advocacy is crucial to that. Lack of awareness on policy issues, totally fair. It can be overwhelming, don't know where to start. We are here to roll out some ideas and resources. I would encourage you to get involved in 484's Public Policy Committee, state associations, other grassroots organizations that pique your interest, sign up for listservs. We can help you get informed. If you're not sure, message me today and I will help you get connected in ways that make the most sense for you. And time commitment. I won't lie, it is time consuming. It is also worth this time commitment, but only you get to decide if it's worth the time and energy that you put in for the output that you get. So that's a summary of barriers of involvement that I want you to consider. What barriers have you experienced internally and externally? And these are internal barriers. This is not addressing systemic issues of not having seats at tables for folks. So we can quote the great Shirley Chisholm, who is basically like, I'll bring my fold-out chair, basically. I'm butchering the words a little bit there, but we can talk about that. We are working to create different systems so that folks have access to the table. Next slide, please. For now, I'm going to hold off on that conversation and I'm going to switch it back over to Andrew and Ron to discuss the thematic areas that we developed in our initiative and the web pages and resources we developed to share.
Thanks, Tina. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Strickland with the APA Policy Office, and I'd like to provide you all with a general overview of the materials that we've developed, as well as explain our rationale for organizing and structuring them in the manner that we decided. First, I want to be clear that a lot of these materials are put together in response to model legislation circulating amongst the states on LGBTQ issues. I want to be clear that model legislation is a tool that can be used by public interest groups to make a broad impact across state lines on an issue, and that can be either for positive ends or negative ends. It's also a tool by which these groups can directly engage with ideologically aligned legislators or their legislative champions, as we call them. The materials on the website are collected and organized in such a way to provide even the newest advocates on LGBTQ issues, provide them with some context and direction on these issues. Some materials, like the talking points, are meant to be adaptable in response to individual circumstances, such as a format that your state psychology association can use to adapt to the context and the political dynamics of their particular states. Let's see. So we selected 4 topics based on a variety of factors. First, we obtained some feedback from the Division 44 Public Policy Committee on their past experiences on state legislation, and that includes legislation, again, that's both supported and opposed by the LGBTQ community. We also conducted something of an environmental scan on LGBTQ legislation introduced in state legislatures in the recent past. And finally, we considered the political dynamics of the day. For example, as you all have seen, the Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling on anti-LGBT discrimination in the employment context. However, the court didn't reach the specific exemption of religious exemptions to these laws. So based on that, we expected many states to attempt to shore up these kinds of religious exemptions. So the 4 issue areas that you see, that you'll see on the website, which Ron will cover in more detail later, include first, legislation that seeks to ban sexual orientation or gender identity change efforts. These are the bills that seek to ban the practice of so-called conversion therapy. Second, you'll see a page dedicated to legislation that seeks to criminalize gender affirmative care with minors. These are the anti-transgender legislation that seeks to restrict the practice of healthcare providers in some way. Third, we have a page dedicated to the religious exemption bills, like the ones I discussed earlier, that allow someone to claim or attempt to allow someone to claim an exemption to a general anti-discrimination laws based on a purported religious belief, which frequently comes up in the housing and employment context. And finally, we have a page dedicated to local universal design ordinances that seek to provide accommodations to transgender and gender non-binary individuals in the use of public facilities. So again, Ron will cover these pages in more detail next, but I also wanted to provide you all with an overview of the content you'll be seeing in each of these pages. Let's see. Each website is divided into 4 to 5 sections. First, you'll see some background information on each topic that's intended to provide, intended to help a broad array of advocates catch up on the facts and motivations behind each kind of bill. There's also a bullet point list of talking points that you can use to directly engage with legislators and staff. These talking points are meant to capture why, from the standpoint of a psychologist, the bill should be supported or opposed. The talking points are also meant to rebut expected arguments that are frequently made by proponents or opponents of the particular bill. Each page also includes recent examples of your peers' advocacy on this topic. And because we're a science driven organization, we include a bibliography of evidence supporting your position on the topic. Finally, we provide other resources concerning each topic. This includes APA resources such as APA's practice guidelines or policy resolutions, but it also includes topical resources that are prepared by Division 44 itself or other allied organizations on LGBTQ advocacy. I also want to stress that these resources are not the end of this conversation. If you feel the need for other resources on a given topic, or if you or your state or local psychology association are seeing newer forms of legislation affecting the LGBTQ community, I would encourage you to reach out to us and please let us know. So before we go to the pages themselves, I want to show you all that these pages also contain key resources on the main landing page. These include research on active LGBT legislation on a state-by-state basis. It'll also include information about what's happening overall in your state. You'll also find information about the status of LGBT issues in current law in your state, as well as other sources of information from allied organizations on this topic. So at this point, I believe I will turn it over to Ron so we can walk through the pages themselves. Ron?
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that, and for Tina for starting us off with such a, I think, fascinating, overview of why the voices of psychologists are so critical, and that this is very doable. So Andrew is going to shift to the web pages themselves, and then what's going to happen is we're going to take a walk through them. This is going to be just really to introduce you to the content and to give you an overview of what we've put together to help support your legislative advocacy efforts in your state. So I'm just letting Andrew give a nice slow scroll through there so you get a sense of it's a simple page. It's not complicated, which I love. So as you can see, there are 4 different topic areas included so far, and each have a tile to click through. We're going to take a closer look at 2 of those, starting with first, banning sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts with minors. And so there, Andrew's clicked through to that page, and you see it's got a nice photograph. And as he scrolls down, you'll see it'll go through the various elements that he described. The background section, and then below that, moving into some suggested talking points. And you'll notice that everything's cited in APA style. There are next examples of advocacy activities by psychologists and state associations on the topic. That's another important point. Your state associations are oftentimes already ahead of the ball on these things, and so if you're looking for ways to engage and be able to support their work, you can let them know and ask what they're doing on a given topic. So in this case, there are some letters on the issue, and there's also both a transcript and a recording of expert testimony before a legislative committee. Which is worth a look. I mean, there's so many roles that psychologists can play in all of this work. And then you'll see that right below the advocacy examples is a call for more examples. So if over the next years you're involved with advocacy work and there are tangible products that you can share with us that we can put on the website to help inform and inspire others, we'd be happy to receive those to be considered for being added. Next, I want to highlight that also provided are links to relevant APA resources. In this instance, it's on the sidebar up toward the top of the page is where it starts. Let me just take a quick look here and see if that's, yeah, there we go. Thank you. By the way, Andrew is serving as our control room today, so thank you so much for helping us find our way through these resources. Um, so, let's see, highlighting, okay. So you'll see there that there are links to different APA resources as has been described already. They're useful to inform your advocacy as you may need to develop more specifics around certain issues or questions or things that you might want to expand upon for both yourself as well as the policymakers. And these, as you'll see, are largely APA resources, primarily things like practice guidelines, policy resolutions, and issue-related resources that have been developed. The last link in that section you'll see says more on LGBTQ resources. Don't click on it right now, Andrew, but when you do click on that one, it takes you right back to the landing page so that you can go back to all of the other tiles. Now, I'm going to note on this page quickly that there's also a section here, See Also. You may already be wondering about this, but we are working on a page like the others on the issue of transgender exclusion in school sports. We need to do some internal vetting of our work on this before it can join the others, but we wanted to at least point to you this useful resource produced by GLSEN on the topic. And I can also tell you that just last week, the Center for American Progress issued a new report called Fair Play on the importance of sports participation for transgender youth. So even if we don't have a resource on that specific topic yet, there are some great places to look, and we hope to have something before too long. So now we're going to click back to the landing page and take a look at one of the other pages. And I'm doing this because there's a difference in part for how the material is organized. You'll see on the page, criminalizing gender affirmative care with minors. I think that's, are we on that page at this point? Yeah, we'll go ahead onto that one if you would, Andrew, thank you. Criminalizing gender affirmative care for minors, you'll see the sections are organized largely in the same way as the other pages. But for this one, we list all of the recommended resources at the bottom of the page because there were just too many for the sidebar. And so, Andrew, if you'll scroll down to those, let's go all the way down and show the resource listing there. It's pretty extensive and quite impressive. Here you see the references again. And again, it starts with APA resources. This first one I really want to say a word about, this consumer guide for parents and guardians of gender diverse children and adolescents. This is a new product created by the Committee on Sexual Orientation and Gender Diversity. And it was created because, as you're probably aware, there's been a lot of concerns raised about minors having access to affirmative care. So what this resource sets out is how, as a parent or guardian, do you make good and consumer choices when selecting providers to provide guidance on gender issues with adolescents and minors. So I'm really excited about that one. The next one you'll see, of course, is our guidelines for psychological practice with transgender, gender non-conforming people. And if you continue to scroll down a bit there for me, Andrew, I want to highlight that there's a lot there. I'm not going to go over all of it, but you'll see in the Also See section, if you continue to scroll, there's a lot there that a number of the items are from Division 44, and there are other resources that we felt were relevant here. But it was all just way too much to put into a sidebar, so our web folks had to organize it this way. Just wanted you to kind of note that. One thing I'm gonna, just as we were having a conversation heading into this today, and we were discussing some of the questions that had already come in, there were a lot of questions about how to do work of this sort intersectionally and with an anti-racism lens. And so we thought we would take a minute and use the material on the bathroom, universal design bathrooms, to have Tina step back in and say a few words about that piece of legislation or that particular topic area and how it's a great illustration for how that work gets done. Tina?
Thank you, Ron. So I'm really excited to have this discussion. This is a discussion that needs to be had at all levels of the psychology field and also all levels of advocacy work that is being done. I will say within Division 44 and the Public Policy Committee more specifically, we continue to have this discussion about making the work that we do accessible to folks of all identities, racially, ethnically, gender, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic status, etc. And so I wanted to kind of highlight the ways in which that we think advocacy can look at different pieces. Andrew, will you go to the page for bathrooms, the universal bathrooms, please? So we have a universal design, all gender restroom. And some folks will often ask, why do we not frame it as like the transgender bathroom bills, which is often what we see coming out of North Carolina originally, right? And the reason for that is actually that we're looking to create safe and healthy places for all folks, including a variety of gender identities. So when we're looking at something like universal design, all gender restrooms, what we want to highlight is that we can create restrooms that are accessible for folks of all gender identities, but this also includes intersectionality of what that might look like based on different types of families, for instances, folks who care for kids, folks who care for folks with disabilities, folks who care for elderly people who might need assistance in the bathroom, these different pieces in which all gender bathrooms are able to give. It also is accessible for folks with different disability levels, folks who might have mobility issues or are in wheelchairs, whatever the kind of dynamic will be. And so when we're looking at these talking points, we talk about it within a gender aspect because this is an LGBTQ plus webpage and this is an LGBTQ plus focused webinar. But really the part is that when we're looking at legislation, there are questions that we want to ask ourselves. Who's writing it? Who is it for? Who's being left out? Whose voice is not at the table? Right. So when we initially look at these types of bills, I can speak with Nevada specifically, as I've done some of this work, is that the question became, do we frame it as a gender bathroom bill? We ultimately chose to frame it as a universal design, with our goal being that all genders are included in safe and accessible bathrooms, but really that all folks can, because we cared about everybody needing access. It was also a strategic piece where we could send it out in a way that would be really hard to argue against, quite honestly, that families and folks with disabilities and all genders and all of these different identities can't have access to bathrooms in ways that make sense. And so what we are missing from the conversation initially might be folks with disabilities. What types of bathroom designs, or folks with different types of families, right? For instance, are there places where babies can be changed within that bathroom? Are the toilets seated in a way that makes sense for folks who are transitioning from a wheelchair over to it? And so I wanted to highlight that although we are focusing within these web pages on a really specific identity, that is not meaning to exclude all the other identities that naturally need to be built into this work. I also want to highlight that specifically pertaining to this webinar today, the folks on this call are white, right? I think that's obvious. I hope so. And so what we are working to do is actually increase the accessibility and other voices of different races, ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, nationalities, languages, and so forth, to look at things that we are missing by virtue of our identities. And also because we don't want to speak on behalf of other folks, we want to amplify the voices of folks that are already doing this work. We are not the first, we will not be the last. People are already on the ground doing this work. And so when we talk about next steps in a little bit, we'll talk about how to do that. But we wanted to highlight a way to look at this in different ways that are gender related and also beyond that into different identities. Thank you, Andrew. And I will transition it back to them for now.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So Andrew, yes, there we are, right back to the main page. What we're going to do now is take a few minutes and talk about the right side column that has links to web-based resources. And Andrew's going to click into these as I describe them so you can have a look at how they're organized. We're going to start with a link to a group called Freedom for All Americans, which provides a very easy to use way to see what's going on state by state with LGBT related legislation. I'm going to let him scroll through there a bit, and you'll see here before long that there's going to be a map. And once you find the map, it's really great because you can just go to your state and click on it, and it'll open up a page, and he's going to go ahead and just pick one so we can see what they've got there. And you can see what has been introduced in your state and know what's going on if you haven't already heard about it in the newspapers. So we think that's a great one. It's very, targeted. It's very user-friendly, and we think it's a really, really great resource to make sure that's a part of this suite that we've pulled together. So I think that gives you a feel for that one. The next one we're going to move to is a website that is hosted by the federal government, but that allows you to find out what's going on in your state legislature right now, this current session. And here again, it's a great map. You just click on your state, and it takes you to the official web page of your state legislature, where you can track the overall legislative calendar. You can dig into looking at what's going on in specific committees. You can figure out, importantly, where a bill is in the process so that you know when and with whom your advocacy efforts need to be targeted. And then, of course, it also provides the overall status of individual bills. And here again, you can see it's pretty straightforward, user-friendly, and it's a great resource as well. The third one we're going to highlight today is the third link on the main page, which is for hold on, let me back up here a second. It's for, yeah, okay. It's for the Equality Federation. And the Equality Federation is an umbrella organization for all of the state level equality organizations around the country. You'll see on this page, when Andrew clicks the About link, he then selects for members. You are taken to a page where you can find contact information for all of the member organizations, either using, again, a map or the listing of all of the state organizations below it. Now, I haven't reviewed this. I don't know if we've got 100% equality representation in every state, but it's still a pretty impressive, network that is very helpful for not only for helping you know where to go to figure out what's going on with your advocacy community and the game plan and their strategies, so that you can figure out and work with them to determine how your contribution can be most helpful and when and with whom the advocacy action is most needed. We're going to go back to the main page, and we're not going to open them up, but the next website, just so you're aware of it, is for the Movement Advancement Project, and it houses another handy map for finding out what the current state of LGBT laws are that are already on the books, as well as assessments of the nature of the policy landscape in your state. We also provide here links to a few resources that will also not be clicking through today, but want you to be aware of. First is the Williams Institute, based at the UCLA School of Law, and it's just an excellent resource of original research that is focused on LGBT issues, and they do a lot of great work that is very state by state focused, as well as more macro. If you're not familiar with them, or even if you are, it's worth getting on their mailing list just to keep up with the great resources that they provide. Also here we have a link to the Human Rights Campaign and the National Center for Transgender Equality. These are examples and certainly not the only places you can go to learn more about issues, but they do have a lot of great content for really, moving beyond the talking points we've provided and drilling down into a lot more detail about different issues. Finally, there's a link to the Center for American Progress and a specific product they've produced. And they have a wealth of resources and analysis on a wide range of topics. The featured link here is not about state legislation, but goes to a resource about advocating for local executive action. So that concludes the tour of our new web pages to support your advocacy. And as has been noted, we fully expect to expand these resources and welcome your recommendations. So now, Tina, I'm turning it back to you.
Hello again. So let's talk about next steps. Next slide, please. So as Ron just said, our resource web pages are not all inclusive or exhaustive of every possible piece. I know he mentioned earlier that we are working on resources for trans youth to be able to access sports in ways that make sense with their gender identity. So we're developing those materials. So ultimately, our goal will be to continue to develop advocacy resources. We want to develop more web pages and resources on specific topics, talking points, very similar to what Ron and Andrew just showed you on our web pages. What we also want to do is have advocacy resources that are really specifically about skill building. So we will be having resources coming up about how to write letters of opposition or letters of support, how to provide testimony, how to engage, all of these different pieces that we think will really help build up the confidence of folks to feel ready to do so. There are some resources already on there of folks already writing letters and folks already giving testimony, as Ron outlined, but we will also put together some how-tos coming up. We also want to have future webinars focused on intersectional marginalized populations, the skill building aspects, and so we want to continue to roll out interactive experiences such as this and others so that we can continue to build this work. So we know that this is really just the launching point for this year-long project that we've been working on, and we have a lot of work to do to continue it. And what we're really hoping is that we can have your voices added to that for folks who are interested in helping develop this. You can reach out to myself and Michelle on the Public Policy Committee, or to Andrew and Ron. Our contact information will be there at the end. But that really, we want to do more. We know there's a lot of room to continue to grow, and in particular focusing on those intersectional identities so that everybody within the LGBTQ population and all of the other identities that intersect with those are visible, are heard, and amplified so that we are not continuing the systemic oppression of said voices. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do is start to wrap up and start fielding some questions. We had a lot of beautiful questions submitted to us ahead of time. And I know that Michelle has been combing through the questions now to put them together for us. And so we will jump into that now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Schlehofer. I've been answering some of your questions and also putting a few links to the resources that got mentioned directly into the chats that you have them available. I have been fielding a few questions, and I think first, I just have a basic question I think Ron could answer. We had a request or a question about a Spanish version of the 10 considerations for finding a gender competent therapist, which I believe we don't have yet, but I wanted to ask if you knew about work on a Spanish version for that.
Thank you for the question and the recommendation. The answer is no. It's really quite a new resource right now, but I really am grateful that you asked. We do have a number of resources that are available in different languages, and typically that involves folks that are interested in collaborating with us to produce the translations as a partnership. We've got a lot of translations of some of the international work my office is involved with, and that's largely involved folks like asking if they can translate our guidelines for working with lesbian, gay, and bisexual clients into, say, Romanian or Czech or whatever it may be, Chinese even. So the short answer is no, but I really appreciate the question, and I will be spending some time thinking about how we might do that.
Thank you. I'm actually going to jump back to a topic that you touched on a little bit earlier regarding engaging in intersectional and anti-racist state level LGBTQ advocacy. And I know that we covered intersectionality in terms of the resources, but I was wondering if there are additional tips or considerations or advice that you have for people engaging in state level advocacy, specifically around how to do that from an anti-racist and intersectional lens.
Sure. Christina's given us some great insights onto that. And what I would like to add from my own experience doing state level work, which I've done a lot of in the past, is that this is about the movement building. And so we need to see this piece of the work as part of the bigger effort, which means that just as LGBT people have intersecting identities across race, across age, across socioeconomic status, and all of the other ways that we think about people in demographic terms, so too are all of those folks. in those different sort of categories where they may have a particular emphasis, but it's nonetheless, just as we're all intersectional people, the issues we're looking at are intersectional as well. And so it's an important way to look at it. And what that gets at is not only is it important to key in on the types of issues we're presenting here today, but in that local and state level coalition building work, how are you supporting one another so that you're bringing your voice to other struggles that may not be your own necessarily, but unless you look at it from a movement perspective and recognize the interconnectedness, then you're missing out on an important piece of what this work is about.
Yeah, I would like to just add to that. I want to echo everything Ron just said and look at how the grassroots movements that are occurring in your community are already existing, right? There are folks doing a lot of amazing work, and how can you get involved and follow their lead in ways that make sense? So for instance, I often donate to something called the Vegas Freedom Fund, which is a subchapter of the larger Freedom Fund to help pay bail basically for folks who get arrested, right? Which disproportionately impacts LGBTQ folks, which disproportionately impacts trans folks, trans women, and in particular trans women of color and Black trans women. And so when we can sit there and communicate and adapt to the resources and communities that are already existing, we can enhance their work that will, in fact, benefit this community, our community, quite broadly, but in a way that doesn't detract from the overall message, which is whatever that particular organization is seeking to do, right? They don't need my particular voice in the Vegas Freedom Fund saying, do it this way, bail out these people. They already know. They just need the resources, the amplification, and the boost up to continue to have the resources to do the amazing work that we're doing. And then if somebody's particularly interested in folks who are LGBTQ that are incarcerated, they would be a great organization to work with because they're already working within incarceration and criminal justice reform, et cetera, so that you can build those networks and relationships where you don't have to go at it alone. In fact, I don't recommend going at it alone. It's hard, long, exhausting work, and there are already people doing it, but really to build in ways that amplify the work they're doing and subsequently amplify the work that you want to do as well.
Thank you. Just to shift gears a little bit, I'm going to ask a question I think probably Andrew could answer. How would advocacy actions differ in states that are more conservative versus progressive?
Well, thanks for asking that question. I think that's a very astute question. I think it's important at the outset, coming from a conservative jurisdiction myself, that, while you're not going to be able to win all hearts and minds on a particular topic, you may be able to sway some with maybe some different messaging on the topic, not just that it's the right or wrong thing to do from a behavioral health perspective, but also that it's expensive, that it drives up costs somewhere else down the line. And I think this really also hammers home the importance of building a diverse coalition that Christina had mentioned earlier. It just brings that diverse array of perspectives to the conversation.
And I just add on to that really quickly that one of the slides we didn't include because we weren't sure if we would have time was something called the long view, which is, you might be in a place right now where it seems really kind of futile, but we all know, looking across the arc of the past 30 to 50 years, what has happened, the transformation that has taken place with LGBTQ plus issues, and it's happened at the policy level, it's happened at the hearts and minds level. And so if it looks impossible now, can think about that work as a down payment, and even standing up and making people say no to you is engaging in a conversation that is already starting to make something happen.
I'll just add, as a clinician, I'm also going to do the whole, it's okay to walk away sometimes if there's an argument where it's not going to be fruitful, it's going to be exhausting to you, it's going to be overwhelming, it's going to be hurtful in some way, because we can't shape every single every single person's views. Some people will never agree with us no matter how solid an argument we make, that there are times it's okay to walk away from those conversations, take care of yourself, and shift who your target audience is, where there might be more movement and bleed through on the causes that you're working to advocate for or against. And so take care of yourself, because this is exhausting work and it takes a lot of you to do this work. So it's also okay to say, this isn't the person to invest my time and energy into. I need to walk away from that and shift it somewhere else.
Thank you. I am going to ask a follow-up question, which I think is related, that came in on the questions that were submitted before today. Policymakers occasionally request data or research to support their drafting of discriminatory legislation. We are unsure how to respond. What do you suggest?
I'll jump in first and I'll say the good news is that quality research that as much as what we've included with our talking points, it seemingly inevitably supports our causes. It would be interesting to know a bit more specifics about the questioner's comment, because I'm wondering in what context the data does not support what we are offering up. And I guess the follow-up answer to that is, if there are folks presenting what they're calling evidence and it's being discussed seriously, and this happens a lot in the banning of sexual orientation change efforts, of course, that we simply, I mean, it's my view that the careful work that APA has done and all of the members have done out and around the world to develop the research that we've embedded in those talking points is, in my view, it's stronger. I'm not really familiar with quality, sound evidence that in any way opposes what we are advocating for or against.
If I could just add to Ron's comment there, I think this also stresses the importance of reaching out to your state or local psychology association. You know, they probably have a good sense of who this legislator is and what they're focused on, and you know, just in the spirit of collaboration and information sharing between you and the state or local psych association.
Thank you. I am going to ask a question that came in. Any advice for psychologists living in states with a strong LGBTQ advocacy history for supporting folks living in states with more oppressive legislative circumstances?
If I could start, I'll start the conversation here. That can be sometimes a challenging topic. You know, the saying in state advocacy is that if you've seen a state legislature, you've seen a state legislature. You know, there's a lot of individual political and interpersonal dynamics between state legislative bodies. So I think it's helpful to reach out to those states to share resources and information and advice. But, you know, I think, you know, again, with some states being in a very conservative climate, I think there also has to be a recognition that progress is made incrementally and not overnight, if that makes sense. You all have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, the only thing that I would add, it's Christina and Michelle that have the most direct experience working in that context, I think, and I'd be fascinated if you do have any thoughts about it. But sort of piggybacking on what Andrew said, also be aware that being supportive may mean, you know, sending money. You know, that's certainly what I've done from time to time. Is there've been things happening in places where I felt like, you know, it wasn't me that was going to be the face of that work, because frankly, their legislators wouldn't pay any attention to me anyway. But you know, I mean, that might be an interesting question to ask collectively of your state equality organization, is what can not just you, but what can the advocacy community do in a more targeted and supportive way? I think that could be a really interesting direction to explore.
And I think if you're in a jurisdiction that's, you know, blessed with an array of local or state LGBT chapters, maybe they have expertise on whatever their chapter in that state has faced in the past.
I was actually going to say money as well. So, and just if you have additional resources or knowledge, content knowledge in an area, then obviously reaching out to equality organizations or grassroots coalitions, or your state, the state psychological association could be useful if you have something to give that would help in advocacy efforts. But otherwise, I would say donations to help fund advocacy efforts within that state that are really led by people living there is probably more effective.
Yeah, one thing I will add too, and this is specific to the state associations and those of you who out there are leadership of state associations, is that we're hoping that this network that we're creating, that you're pretty much now all a part of, we can provide technical assistance that say, you know, one psych association dealt with this topic last year and the other psych association is looking for guidance on how to best perhaps approach it. If we can do some networking, helping with networking, getting state associations that are dealing with some piece of legislation, working with other state associations that are or have already dealt with whatever that issue is, then there's a great opportunity there for some cross support institutionally as well. So we're closing in on the last 5 minutes, and I'm thinking maybe one more question and then we should do our kind of wrap up so that everybody can get back to their day and answer the questions in the survey for us.
Yes, so I will ask again, one of the questions that came in before the session that I think would be useful is, what's the best way for people to track pending state level legislation?
Yeah, well, the answer to that is those links that we provide on the homepage of this new set of resources. You will see that there is the first one that completely, you know, presents exactly what's going on state by state with LGBT legislation specifically, and that might be a little easier to manage, especially for people who are newer at this. And then there is that website that includes all of the state legislatures, and that gives you the total overview of what's going on in your state legislature. We really wanted to make this, you know, a self-serve, useful resource that not only are we providing APA stuff and Division 44 stuff, but we wanted to provide you process tools as well. And so I hope that you will find that those are useful. And if you learn of others or know of others that you think also would be useful, we'd love to know about them.
I would also add just briefly that most states, I don't know how user-friendly they will be, will have their own legislative tracking tools so that you can create an account for your state legislative sessions, choose bills that you're interested to track, and it'll email you updates. I use this all the time on my state level advocacy work. It's super helpful. I get an email at the end of the night telling me about what bills were introduced. I can track them, I can tag them, I can do all kinds of things with them. So I look into your state level legislative website to see if they have their own tracking system you can sign into.
Great. And with that, I think we're going to move on to the next slide, do a few thank yous, and do a little bit of a wrap up. As we near the end of the webinar, we'd also like to acknowledge the contributions of the Division 44 Public Policy Committee, who contributed to the content in a number of the talking points, and to the APA staff in our communications office, division services, the practice directorate, and a big special thank you to the membership office for their amazing promotional and production support to make this webinar possible. Then finally, the next slide, we'd like to thank you all for joining us. It's been our pleasure to develop and share with you this new tool, and we look forward to your thoughts about how it can be expanded and improved upon. We encourage you to visit these pages after today's overview and give them a close read. Lastly, before we go, once the webinar closes, as has already been noted, you'll be given the opportunity to respond to a brief survey. And we look forward to your thoughts about today's presentation and if and how you found it useful. We would greatly appreciate your feedback as we work to continue to develop additional resources. So with that, thank you again, and best wishes for empowering and impactful adventures in advocacy.